Some people wear masks to hide their identity. Others wear kindness to hide their crimes. Behind hospital uniforms, carrying smiles and gentle hands, lived predators who turned trust into a weapon. These aren't just criminals. These are women who shattered every assumption about evil. Women who killed in silence, smiled while murdering, and left behind questions that still haunt us today. This is the dark side of humanity you were never supposed to see. Let's begin. Number 1 is Aileen Carol Wuornos. Aileen Carol Wuornos was born on February 29, 1956, in Rochester, Michigan, a child born into chaos. Her father, a convicted child rapist, ended his life in prison. Her mother, just a teenager, abandoned Aileen and her brother before she was even old enough to remember her name. Raised by her grandparents in Troy, Michigan, Aileen's childhood was one of violence and fear. Her grandfather, a severe and abusive man, ruled their home through intimidation. At just 11, Aileen was trading sexual favors for cigarettes and food, earning her the cruel nickname, Cigarette Pig. By 14, she was pregnant, she claimed through rape, and sent away to give birth in secret. The child was taken from her. Soon after, her grandmother died, and her grandfather threw her out. Aileen slept in the woods, living off scraps and survival instincts. The world had already begun shaping a monster it would one day fear. In late 1989, Florida's sun-soaked highways became silent hunting grounds. Aileen, working as a sex worker and living in motels with her girlfriend, Tyria Moore, began her killing spree. Her first victim, Richard Mallory, disappeared after picking her up on November 30th. 2 weeks later, his body was found, shot multiple times, abandoned in the woods. Over the next 11 months, 6 more men would meet the same fate. David Spears, Charles Carskadden, Troy Burress, Charles Dick Humphreys, Peter Seams, and Walter Antonio. Each shot dead, their bodies dumped along lonely stretches of road. Wuornos later claimed she killed in self-defense, that each man had assaulted or attempted to rape her. But her later confession stripped that away. "I killed those men, robbed them as cold as ice, and I'd do it again, too." The pattern was methodical. She'd steal their money, pawn their belongings, even drive their cars. Each murder seemed less about survival and more about rage. Rage at a lifetime of abuse, rejection, and exploitation. Behind her vacant stare was a storm that had been building since childhood, and in Florida's quiet highways, it finally erupted. As bodies appeared, investigators connected the crimes through pawned property and a single fingerprint left on a car door. Witnesses described 2 women abandoning one of the victims' vehicles, Aileen Wuornos and Tyria Moore. When the heat grew unbearable, Moore fled the state. Wuornos stayed behind. On January 9, 1991, police found her at the Last Resort, a biker bar in Port Orange, Florida. She was drinking beer when officers moved in. To save herself, Moore cooperated with police, coaxing a taped confession from Aileen over the phone. Soon after, Wuornos admitted to 7 murders on camera. The nation watched as the so-called damsel of death smiled through her confessions. Justice had found her, but so had the spotlight. In January 1992, Aileen Wuornos was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. Over the next year, she pleaded guilty to 5 more killings, each ending in the same fate, another death sentence. Her sanity was questioned repeatedly, but Aileen refused appeals. "I want to leave this earth," she told the court. On October 9, 2002, she was executed by lethal injection at age 46. Her final words were cryptic: "I'm sailing with the rock, and I'll be back, like Independence Day with Jesus." Her ashes were scattered under a Michigan tree, the same state where her nightmare began. Was Aileen Wuornos born evil or created by the cruelty of others? Her life blurs the line between victim and villain, mercy and monstrosity. In the end, she became the very thing she feared most, a predator in a world that had preyed on her since birth. Some monsters aren't born in darkness, they're forged in it. Number 2 is Dorothea Helen Gray. Dorothea Helen Gray was born on January 9, 1929, in Redlands, California, into a household marred by chaos. Both parents were alcoholics. Her father threatened suicide in front of his children, dying of tuberculosis when Dorothea was just 8. Her mother, a sex worker, lost custody and died later that year in a motorcycle accident. Dorothea and her siblings were sent to an orphanage, where she endured sexual abuse. At 16, she married Fred McFall, a soldier, giving birth to 2 daughters, one placed for adoption, the other sent to relatives. By 18, she faced her first brushes with the law, arrested for forgery and sentenced to brief jail time. Subsequent marriages and identity shifts, assuming names like Thea Singoala Nyarda and Sharon Johansson, allowed her to construct a persona of a caring matron. By the 1970s, she ran a Sacramento boarding house, presenting herself as a charitable community figure, helping the homeless, elderly, and mentally ill, all while hiding a growing capacity for manipulation and deceit. In the 1980s, Puente's seemingly benevolent boarding house became a facade for a series of calculated murders. Victims were predominantly elderly or mentally disabled, drawn to her promise of shelter and assistance. On January 16, 1982, she drugged Malcolm McKenzie before stealing his valuables. In April, Ruth Monroe, 61, overdosed on codeine at Puente's home. Her death would later be ruled a homicide. Over the following years, Dorothea systematically exploited residents' trust, forging checks and collecting Social Security benefits. Everson Theodore Gilmouth arrived in 1985. Soon after, Puente had him confined in a storage box, which was later found floating in the Sacramento River. Between 1986 and 1988, she assumed control of identities and finances of Betty Mae Palmer, Leona Carpenter, James Gallup, Vera Faye Martin, Dorothy Miller, and Alvaro Montoya. Each was sedated, overdosed, and buried on her property, often in shallow graves or under concrete. Toxicology reports revealed sedatives, antidepressants, and hypnotics, drugs meant to incapacitate, not cure. Puente forged letters to conceal deaths, maintaining an illusion that her victims were still alive. Her methods were methodical, cold, and devoid of remorse. Even casual acts of caregiving were twisted into instruments of control. The chilling pattern: trust, isolation, sedation, and disappearance, repeated with meticulous precision. Authorities began piecing together Puente's crimes in November 1988, when former Tenant John Sharp revealed inconsistencies in her stories about Alvaro Montoya. Permission to search the F Street boarding house uncovered the first body within minutes. Puente vanished briefly before being traced to Los Angeles, where she was arrested on November 16th under the alias Donna Johansson. Investigators documented 9 murders, discovering a web of drugged victims, forged checks, and burial sites across her property. Handyman Ismael Flores testified about constructing storage boxes used to conceal bodies, and forensic toxicology tied overdoses to Puente's administration. Courtroom proceedings revealed a meticulous criminal mind, sedatives combined with deception, each act calculated to exploit vulnerability. By March 31, 1989, she faced 9 counts of murder with special circumstances, initiating a trial that would last years, involve over 3,100 exhibits, 156 witnesses, and ultimately expose the full scope of her cold, methodical cruelty. On August 26, 1993, Puente was convicted of 3 murders: Benjamin Fink, Leona Carpenter, and Dorothy Miller, while the jury deadlocked on 6 others. During the penalty phase, jurors could not unanimously agree on the death sentence. On December 10, 1993, she received life imprisonment without parole and was incarcerated at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. Appeals were rejected, and Puente remained imprisoned until her death on March 27, 2011, at age 82. Families of victims and the public were left grappling with the horror of her deception, mourning lives lost to seduction, manipulation, and cold-blooded calculation. Dorothea Puente's crimes force a confrontation with the fragility of trust and the darkness that can lurk behind a facade of care. She preyed on society's most vulnerable, turning compassion into a weapon. Some monsters do not hide in shadows. They live among us, smiling, feeding, and calculating, leaving questions that echo long after justice has been served. If you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, now is the time. We dive deep into the darkest true crime stories that will leave you questioning everything. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Number 3 is Genene Jones. Genene Jones was born on July 13, 1950, in Texas, and adopted by a nightclub owner and his wife. From the outside, her childhood looked stable, a comfortable home, structure, opportunity. But inside, she grew up isolated, emotionally detached, and hungry for validation. As a teenager, she searched for identity and control, eventually marrying her high school sweetheart in 1968 and becoming a mother. That marriage fractured, then briefly reunited before dissolving again. Jones shifted careers from beautician to nursing in the late 1970s, drawn to environments where she held power over the vulnerable. Co-workers would later describe her as intense, attention-seeking, someone who thrived during medical emergencies. The seeds of danger were already there, a need to be the hero, a willingness to create chaos she could later solve. This need for control would follow her into the pediatric wards, with devastating consequences. By the late 1970s, Jones was working as a licensed vocational nurse in the pediatric intensive care unit of Behar County Hospital in San Antonio. It was here that a disturbing pattern began to form. Infants and young children under her care suffered sudden, unexplained medical crises, cardiac arrests, breathing failure, rapid declines that defied logic. A statistically impossible number died. Hospital administrators, fearing lawsuits rather than seeking answers, asked all LVNs to resign. Jones walked away without investigation, free to continue. She moved to a pediatric clinic in Kerrville, Texas. There, the pattern sharpened. A doctor discovered 2 puncture marks in a vial of succinylcholine, a powerful paralytic used in anesthesia. Only he and Jones had access. Tests revealed the bottle had been diluted with saline, evidence of tampering. Soon after, children began collapsing without warning. Jones used injections of digoxin, heparin, and succinylcholine, drugs capable of stopping a child's heart or paralyzing their ability to breathe. Some survived. Many did not. Her victims included 15-month-old Chelsea McClellan, who died after a dose of succinylcholine. Others, Brandy Benitez, Chris Parker, Jimmy Pearson, Misty Reichenau, and Jacob Evans, suffered life-threatening reactions in August and September of 1982. Jones claimed she was trying to stimulate the creation of a pediatric ICU, positioning herself as the nurse who could save the children she was harming. Behind the uniform was a woman manufacturing emergencies and controlling who lived and who didn't. In 1982, suspicions at the Kerrville Clinic reached a breaking point. The discovery of tampered medication led investigators to examine Jones' actions more closely. Medical records, though poorly preserved, pointed to a chilling correlation. When Jones was on duty, children crashed. When she was absent, the ward was calm. Forensic analysis of Chelsea McClellan's death revealed succinylcholine, a drug that should never have been in a pediatric clinic. Investigators tied multiple medical crises to Jones, noting punctured vials, diluted drugs, and consistent access only she possessed. On November 21, 1982, Jones was arrested. In 1984, she was convicted of murder and injury to a child. Courtrooms heard of intentional injections, violations of trust, and the betrayal of the most vulnerable patients. Her calm demeanor in court contrasted sharply with the devastating testimonies of grieving families. In 1985, Jones received a 99-year sentence for the murder of Chelsea McClellan, followed by a concurrent 60-year sentence for nearly killing Rolando Santos with heparin. Because of Texas mandatory early release laws, she was scheduled for release in 2018. To prevent this, prosecutors filed new charges. In 2020, Jones pleaded guilty to the murder of 11-month-old Joshua Sawyer from 1981. She was sentenced to life in prison. As of 2025, she remains incarcerated and will not be eligible for parole until approximately 2037, when she is nearly 87 years old. Genene Jones was trusted to protect the weakest among us, yet she turned hospitals into hunting grounds. Her case forces us to confront an unsettling truth. Evil can wear a uniform, speak gently, and hide behind the chaos it creates. And it leaves us with a haunting question. How many children's voices were silenced, not by illness, but by the hands sworn to save them? Number 4 is Karla Homolka. Karla Homolka was born on May 4, 1970, in Mississauga, Ontario, the eldest daughter in a seemingly ordinary Canadian family. From the outside, the Homolkas looked stable, even loving. But inside that home was a girl who learned early how to mold herself into whatever others needed her to be. She excelled socially, charmed adults easily, and presented a calm, obedient facade that concealed a growing emotional detachment. Her younger sister, Tammy Homolka, born in 1975, became the center of Karla's attention, a relationship that hovered between protectiveness and unsettling fixation. Friends recalled Karla's need for control, her ability to switch her personality depending on the room she was in. Nothing seemed extreme, yet nothing felt entirely genuine either. Her world changed forever in 1987 when she met Paul Bernardo. He was charismatic, confident, and already harboring violent fantasies. Karla was drawn to that darkness, not frightened, fascinated. What began as a romance quickly formed a dynamic that fed each of their worst impulses. By the time she graduated with an interest in psychology, the transformation was complete. Karla had become both student and architect of manipulation. And as the relationship deepened, the line between victim and willing accomplice disappeared. The violence began inside her own home. In the summer of 1990, Paul Bernardo fixated on Tammy Homolka. Karla did not push back. Instead, she planned. First came the Valium stolen from her workplace, then the spiked dinner. Tammy survived that night, but Karla did not stop. On December 23, 1990, after a family Christmas party, Karla stole halothane from the veterinary clinic where she worked. She and Bernardo drugged Tammy again, this time into unconsciousness. The couple raped her as she lay helpless. When Tammy began to choke on her own vomit, they staged the room, cleaned the evidence, and dressed her in fresh clothes before calling 911. She was pronounced dead hours later. Her death ruled a tragic accident. But Tammy was only the beginning. In June 1991, Karla lured a 15-year-old girl, known only as Jane Doe, to their home. She drugged her, assaulted her, and helped Bernardo videotape the attack. 2 months later, the girl returned and nearly died in their home. Days later, 14-year-old Leslie Mahaffey vanished after missing her curfew. Bernardo abducted her, driving her to the Port Dalhousie home he shared with Karla. For hours, they videotaped themselves raping and torturing the terrified teen. When Leslie's blindfold slipped and she could identify them, she was killed, her body dismembered and encased in concrete before being dumped in Lake Gibson. Less than a year later, 15-year-old Kristen French was taken in broad daylight. Witnesses watched the abduction unfold, but it was too fast to stop. Over Easter weekend in 1992, Karla and Bernardo filmed days of torture, rape, and escalating violence. Kristen was never blindfolded. She was never meant to survive. Her body was found on April 30th, washed, hair cut, left in a ditch miles from home. By then, the couple believed they had perfected the process. Instead, the evidence was closing in. Witness statements, forensic clues, and Bernardo's growing history of sexual violence drew police closer. When his DNA was linked to multiple assaults, investigators searched their home. The breakthrough came when videotapes were recovered, recordings that showed Karla not as a coerced victim, but an active participant. Facing overwhelming evidence, Karla struck a plea deal in May 1993. She testified against Bernardo in exchange for a 12-year manslaughter sentence. Days later, the tapes surfaced publicly, revealing her deeper involvement and igniting national outrage. Bernardo received life imprisonment and a dangerous offender designation. Karla walked away with a fraction of the penalty. Karla served 12 years in Canadian prisons, completing a psychology degree while incarcerated. She was released on July 4, 2005, under strict conditions designed to protect the public. She later settled in Quebec, lived briefly in the Caribbean, and eventually returned to Canada, remarried, and became a mother. As of 2025, she remains free, her past never forgotten, but legally behind her. Karla Homolka's story forces a haunting question. Was she shaped by a predator, or did she find one who matched what was already inside her? Evil is rarely born in isolation. Sometimes it grows quietly behind closed doors. And long after the case files are sealed, the shadows of her choices continue to linger. Before we continue, make sure you've liked this video. If you haven't yet, hit that like button right now. It helps us bring you more shocking true crime content like this. Number 5 is Beverley Allitt. Beverley Allitt was born on October 4, 1968, in the quiet village of Corby Glen, near Grantham in Lincolnshire. She grew up in a working-class family with 2 sisters and a brother. Her father worked in an off-license, and her mother cleaned at the local school. On the surface, Beverley's childhood looked ordinary, but beneath that normality was a young girl who learned early how to draw attention through illness, injury, and sympathy. Classmates remembered frequent absences and unexplained medical complaints. At home, she often volunteered to babysit younger children, a role that gave her control, responsibility, and an audience for her carefully crafted vulnerability. After failing to earn entry into a selective school, she attended Charles Reed's Secondary Modern and left at 16. Nursing, she believed, would give her purpose. Instead, it gave her access and eventually victims. The gentle countryside backdrop hid a mind preparing to cross a line that could never be undone. In February 1991, at Grantham and Kesteven Hospital's Children's Ward, the pattern began. Subtle at first, sudden medical collapses, unexplained alarms, infants who were stable moments earlier slipping into cardiac arrest. Beverley Allitt, a state-enrolled nurse, was always present, always calm, always ready to help. Her first known victim was an 11-week-old infant, whose unexplained episode raised quiet concern. Over the next weeks, the crises grew in number and severity. Allitt administered massive doses of insulin to at least 2 children. Another infant was found with a large air bubble in the bloodstream, an injection no one could explain. 4 children died. 9 more suffered grievous bodily harm or survived attempted murder. Each event seemed to strike without warning, and each time Allitt positioned herself as the attentive nurse, guiding grief-stricken parents, comforting staff, and absorbing the sympathy she craved. The attacks continued for 59 days, escalating in frequency and boldness. The death of 7-week-old Becky Phillips became the turning point. Her sudden deterioration, followed by the collapse of her twin sister Katie shortly after, finally forced staff to question the impossible number of emergencies. These children entered the ward seeking care. Instead, they met a predator who thrived in the silence between heartbeats. When the deaths and collapses became impossible to ignore, the hospital alerted authorities. Investigators examined staffing schedules, medical charts, and drug access logs. The pattern was stark. Beverley Allitt had been on duty for every attack. Each unexplained injection, each dose discrepancy, each collapse connected back to her. Police uncovered insulin irregularities, air embolism evidence, and toxicology findings they could not overlook. Medical experts struggled to explain how so many sudden arrests could occur naturally. The answer pointed in one direction. Allitt was charged with 4 murders, 11 attempted murders, and 11 counts of causing grievous bodily harm. She denied all allegations. But in May 1993, after a lengthy and disturbing trial, a jury found her guilty on every charge. The courtroom listened in stunned silence as she received 13 life sentences. For the families, justice was delivered, but closure remained distant. Following her conviction, Allitt was detained at Rampton Secure Hospital, a high-security psychiatric facility in Nottinghamshire. In 2007, the High Court confirmed a minimum tariff of 30 years. That term expired in November 2021, making her eligible for parole. In December 2023, her request to transfer from the hospital to a mainstream prison, a necessary step toward parole, was denied. She cannot apply again until 2026. As of 2025, Beverley Allitt remains incarcerated at Rampton, still considered a risk to the public. Beverley Allitt's crimes leave behind a haunting truth. Sometimes the greatest danger comes from those entrusted with our most fragile lives. The children she harmed were meant to be safe in her care. Instead, they became victims of a need for attention that grew into something monstrous. And decades later, the question remains, how does someone meant to heal become the source of so much suffering? Number 6 is Myra Hindley. Myra Hindley was born in 1942, in a working-class family in Manchester. From an early age, she displayed a complex personality, intelligent, ambitious, yet deeply impressionable. By her late teens, Hindley's life was marked by rebellion and emotional turbulence. She met Ian Brady in 1961, and what began as a romantic relationship soon morphed into a dangerous partnership. Under Brady's influence, Hindley transitioned from a young woman with a desire for social acceptance into an accomplice in some of the most shocking crimes in British history. This section explores the psychological factors that may have made Hindley susceptible to Brady's manipulation, examining how charm, intelligence, and vulnerability combine to form a chilling predisposition toward criminality. Her early life is crucial in understanding how an ordinary girl became entwined in extraordinary evil. Between 1963 and 1965, Hindley, alongside Brady, committed a series of calculated murders of children and teenagers, later known as the Moors murders. She played an active role in luring victims, facilitating their abduction, and participating in their brutal deaths. The pair buried some victims on Saddleworth Moor, a remote location that became synonymous with their crimes. Hindley's participation shocked the nation, defying societal expectations of femininity and maternal instinct. Her actions during this period were not only criminal but also psychologically manipulative. She contributed to the terror through her calm, controlled demeanor. This section reconstructs the sequence of crimes, highlighting Hindley's role, the terror inflicted on victims, and the wider social impact, framing her as both participant and architect of fear. Hindley and Brady were arrested in 1965, and the ensuing trial revealed the depth of their depravity. Hindley was immediately vilified by the press and public, partly because her crimes violated gender norms, challenging the perception of women as nurturers. Photographs and evidence of her involvement cemented her notoriety, with some media likening her appearance to the mythical Medusa. Hindley's refusal to fully confess to certain murders for decades, especially those of Reed and Bennett, compounded public outrage. This section examines her courtroom demeanor, the media frenzy surrounding her trial, and the intense societal condemnation that followed, establishing Hindley as the face of evil in modern Britain. Following her conviction, Hindley spent decades in prison, initially serving time as a high-security prisoner before being reclassified. She sought to demonstrate reform through religious conversion and good behavior, yet repeated applications for parole were denied. Attempts to escape, flirtations with prison staff, and correspondence with Brady illustrated a complex character struggling between remorse and self-interest. Public campaigns, especially from victims' families, ensured her release remained impossible. Despite her incarceration, Hindley's life remained a subject of national fascination, reflecting society's enduring struggle to reconcile punishment, rehabilitation, and the moral weight of her crimes. Hindley died in 2002 from bronchial pneumonia at the age of 60, having never been released. Her ashes were scattered near Saddleworth Moor, symbolically linking her death to the crimes that defined her life. Even decades later, her image remains a cultural touchstone for evil, inspiring literature, music, television, and art. The public's enduring obsession with Hindley underscores the intersection of gender, crime, and media in shaping collective memory. This section reflects on her legacy, examining how her notoriety continues to influence perceptions of female criminality and societal responses to unspeakable acts of violence. If you're still watching and haven't subscribed, what are you waiting for? This channel uncovers the stories that others won't touch. Subscribe now and join thousands who can't get enough of deep dive true crime content. Number 7 is Kristen Heather Strickland. Kristen Heather Strickland was born on November 13, 1967, in Fall River, Massachusetts. Her father, Richard, worked as an electronics executive. Her mother, Claudia, was a homemaker and part-time teacher. But beneath the surface of suburban normalcy, something darker was taking shape. As Kristen entered her teenage years, those closest to her noticed a pattern. She lied constantly. She faked suicide attempts to manipulate people. Court records would later reveal she made violent threats against others while still in high school. These weren't teenage tantrums. They were warning signs no one fully understood. After a staged suicide attempt at Bridgewater State College, led to mandatory psychiatric treatment. She transferred schools twice before earning her nursing diploma from Greenfield Community College in 1988. That same year, she became a registered nurse, married Glenn Gilbert, and gained access to the most vulnerable people imaginable. In 1989, Kristen Gilbert joined the Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Northampton, Massachusetts. She was even featured in VA Practitioner magazine in April 1990. But her colleagues began noticing something unsettling. When Gilbert was on duty, patients died. A lot of patients. They started calling her the Angel of Death as a joke. No one wanted to believe what it really meant. Gilbert had discovered the perfect weapon, epinephrine. She would inject lethal doses into patients' intravenous bags, inducing cardiac arrest. Then she would respond to the code herself, often attempting resuscitation. Sometimes she saved them, sometimes she let them die. Prosecutors determined she was on duty for roughly half of the 350 deaths that occurred between 1989 and 1996. The statistical probability of this being coincidence? 1 in 100 million. 4 victims have been confirmed: Stanley Jagodowski, Henry Huden, Kenneth Cutting, and Edward Squira. She didn't kill for money or revenge. She killed for attention. Specifically, the attention of James Perot, a VA police officer, and her boyfriend. Hospital protocol required police presence at every medical emergency. Every code meant he would come running. In her twisted logic, murder was a love language. On November 9, 1995, she deliberately abandoned a patient in cardiac arrest, waiting until a colleague discovered the dying patient before raising an alarm. When the investigation began closing in, she called in a bomb threat to the hospital. By 1996, 3 nurses formally reported their concerns about the spike in cardiac arrests and the mysterious disappearance of epinephrine. Gilbert left the hospital and checked herself into psychiatric facilities 7 times over the following months, each stay lasting between 1 and 10 days. In January 1998, she stood trial for the bomb threat and was convicted that April. Former boyfriend James Perot testified that she had confessed to at least 1 murder during a phone call while hospitalized. On March 14, 2001, a federal jury convicted Gilbert on 3 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of second-degree murder, and 2 counts of attempted murder. Prosecutors pushed for the death penalty since her crimes occurred on federal property. The jury deliberated while the defense presented mitigating factors, including her 2 young sons. On March 26, 2001, the jury recommended life imprisonment. The judge sentenced Gilbert to 4 consecutive life terms without parole, plus 20 years. She was transferred to FMC Carswell in Fort Worth, Texas. As of 2025, Kristen Gilbert remains incarcerated. Kristen Gilbert didn't kill out of rage or desperation. She killed because it made her feel important. For families will never see their loved ones again. Hundreds more may never know the truth. Some people become nurses to save lives. Kristen Gilbert became one to decide who lived and who died. Number 8 is Amy Bishop. Amy Bishop was born on April 24, 1965, in Massachusetts. From an early age, she was immersed in academia, the daughter of a professor and a student with a natural inclination toward science. She attended Northeastern University before earning her PhD in genetics from Harvard, where her research focused on cellular and neurological functions. Bishop's academic trajectory seemed promising. She published scientific articles, taught at Harvard Medical School, and in 2003 joined the University of Alabama in Huntsville as an assistant professor. Students and colleagues initially saw her as ambitious and intelligent, someone who had carved a respectable place in a competitive field. Alongside her husband, she even co-developed a portable cell incubator, winning recognition and financial backing. To the outside world, Bishop embodied the prestige of higher education and the promise of scientific discovery. Yet, beneath the achievements, there were troubling signs. In 1986, at just 21, Bishop fatally shot her 18-year-old brother, Seth, in their Massachusetts home. Although officially ruled an accident, inconsistencies in the case and her attempt to commandeer a car at gunpoint afterward raised doubts. Years later, she and her husband were investigated in connection with a pipe bomb incident involving her former supervisor, though no charges were filed. In 2002, Bishop was arrested for assault after punching a woman during a dispute over a booster seat at a restaurant, declaring, "I am Dr. Amy Bishop." Colleagues described her as erratic, prone to bizarre tangents, and out of touch with reality. By 2009, complaints from students labeled her as ineffective and unsettling in the classroom. The denial of her tenure that year, a devastating blow in academic circles, deepened her frustrations and appeared to push her closer to collapse. On February 12, 2010, Bishop taught her class as usual before heading to a biology department faculty meeting. For nearly 40 minutes, she sat silently among her colleagues. Then, without warning, she pulled out a 9mm handgun and began firing execution style at those seated nearest to her. Department Chairman Gopi Padala, along with Professors Maria Ragland Davis and Adrielle Johnson, were killed. 3 others were wounded, including Joseph Leahy and staff member Stephanie Monticchiolo. Survivors described the attack as deliberate and chilling. When her weapon jammed, biochemistry professor Deborah Moriarty confronted Bishop, urging her to stop, and with others, forced her out of the room, likely saving additional lives. Minutes later, police arrested Bishop outside the building. She denied the shootings, insisting her colleagues were still alive. Bishop was charged with capital murder and 3 counts of attempted murder. Prosecutors initially prepared for a death penalty case, but after survivors and victims' families opposed execution, she pleaded guilty in September 2012. She was sentenced to life in prison without parole. The Huntsville tragedy reopened scrutiny of her past. Massachusetts officials re-examined the 1986 death of her brother, concluding that probable cause for charges had existed all along. Bishop was even indicted for first-degree murder decades after the fact, but Massachusetts authorities declined to pursue the case once she was sentenced to life in Alabama. Today, Amy Bishop remains in an Alabama prison, cut off from the academic world she once fought to dominate. The University of Alabama in Huntsville mourned the loss of 3 respected faculty members, holding a memorial attended by thousands. Survivors returned to their work, though forever scarred by what they endured. For many, the deeper tragedy lies not only in the crime itself, but in the missed opportunities for intervention. Moments in 1986, 1993, and 2002 when warning signs were overlooked or dismissed. Amy Bishop's story forces us to question the intersection of brilliance and instability, of ambition and violence. How does someone with every intellectual advantage unravel so completely? Could earlier accountability have prevented later bloodshed? Her case reminds us that unchecked warning signs can echo forward, shaping not just individual lives but entire communities. In the end, the story of Amy Bishop is not just about a professor's fall from grace. It is about the cost of silence when red flags go unheeded. But as disturbing as that story is, it's only the beginning.
Have you liked this video yet? If not, do it now. Your support keeps this channel going and helps us uncover more chilling stories like these. Number 9 is Elizabeth May Parker. Elizabeth May Parker was born on June 10, 1967, in Woodstock, Ontario, into a staunchly Baptist household where control and shame ruled every corner of her life. Her father, Doug, was a homophobe who monitored her every move. Her mother, Hazel, remained silent and compliant. Elizabeth was shy, awkward, and relentlessly bullied at school. She tried adding an E to her name, Beta, hoping it would make the torment stop. Didn't. When she developed romantic feelings for another girl, her family forced her into reparative therapy. She later described feeling consumed by self-hatred. She graduated from London Baptist Bible College with a degree in religious education, then studied nursing at Conestoga College. In 1997, she married truck driver Donnie Wettlaufer, but he divorced her after discovering her affair with a woman. She later partnered with Sheila Andrews. She struggled with bipolar disorder and nearly died from a medication overdose. In 2007, she began working at Care Sant Care in Woodstock. That's when the killing began. Wettlaufer's weapon was insulin. She would inject elderly patients with lethal doses, inducing hypoglycemic shock and cardiac arrest. Her first attempts in 2007 targeted sisters Clotilde Adriano, 87, and Albina de Medeiros, 88.
Both survived the injections but died later. Her first confirmed murder was James Silcox, an 84-year-old World War II veteran and father of 6, on August 11, 2007. Days later, she killed Maurice Granat, 84. After Sheila Andrews left her, Wettlaufer's rage intensified. Between 2011 and 2014, she murdered 6 more patients at Care St. Care. Gladys Millard, 87. Helen Matheson, 95. Mary Zurawinski, 96. Helen Young, 90. Maureen Pickering, 79. She also attempted to murder Michael Priddle, 63, and Wayne Hedges, 57, but both survived. Throughout this time, Wettlaufer was suspended 4 times for medication errors. Co-workers found her passed out drunk during night shifts. In March 2014, she was fired after giving wrong medication to a patient. But she didn't stop. She took temp jobs at other facilities. At Meadow Park in London, she murdered Arpit Horvath, 75. She also attacked Sandra Towler, 77, and Beverly Bertram, 68, with intent to kill. Both survived. Wettlaufer later confessed she experienced uncontrollable surges before each murder. She described feeling something rising from her stomach, then hearing cackling laughter she believed came from the pit of hell. She told police, "God or the devil or whatever wanted me to do it." Yet she admitted she knew the difference between right and wrong. On September 16, 2016, Wettlaufer checked herself into the Center for Addiction and Mental Health in Toronto. There, she confessed everything to staff. They notified the College of Nurses of Ontario and Toronto Police. She emailed her resignation, admitting she had deliberately harmed patients. She called an investigator personally and had staff fax a 4-page handwritten confession. Wettlaufer had confessed before, to friends, a former partner, her pastor, even a lawyer who told her to keep quiet. No one reported her. On October 25, 2016, she was charged with 8 counts of murder. More charges followed in January 2017, 4 counts of attempted murder and 2 counts of aggravated assault. On June 1, 2017, Wettlaufer pleaded guilty to all charges. On June 26, she was sentenced to 8 concurrent life terms with no possibility of parole for 25 years. The College of Nurses formally revoked her license, calling her conduct the most egregious and disgraceful they had ever seen. Ontario launched a public inquiry to investigate how she was allowed to kill for nearly a decade. She was transferred to a Montreal facility for medical treatment in March 2018. She will be eligible for parole in 2041. Elizabeth Wettlaufer killed 14 people, 8 dead, 6 injured. She described her murders as surges she couldn't control, laughter from hell she couldn't silence. But she knew it was wrong. She confessed multiple times, and still no one stopped her. The victims trusted the system. The system failed them. Number 10 is Juana Dayanara Barraza Sampirio. Juana Dayanara Barraza Sampirio was born on December 27, 1957, in Epizoyucan, Hidalgo, a rural area north of Mexico City. Her childhood was a nightmare that would shape the monster she would become. Her mother, Justice Sampirio, was an alcoholic who reportedly traded her daughter for 3 beers. The man who received her raped Juana repeatedly. She became pregnant with his child while still a child herself. She eventually had 4 children, though her eldest son died from injuries sustained in a mugging. The trauma never left her. She grew to associate elderly women with her mother, the woman who had sold her, abandoned her, destroyed her. Juana found escape in lucha libre, Mexican masked professional wrestling. She became a professional wrestler known as La Dama del Silencio, the Lady of Silence. She fought as a Ruda, a villain character, strong, intimidating, silent. In the ring, she could be powerful. Outside the ring, she was haunted by a past that refused to let go. Between 1998 and 2006, elderly women across Mexico City began dying under mysterious circumstances. The killer became known as La Mataviejitas, the little old lady killer. Authorities estimated between 42 and 48 victims, though Barraza was only convicted of 16 murders. Her victims were always women aged 60 or older, many of whom lived alone. Barraza would pose as a government social worker, offering to help them sign up for welfare programs. She gained their trust. They opened their doors to her. And then she killed them. She bludgeoned some. She strangled others with whatever was available, stethoscopes, telephone cords, her bare hands. Afterward, she robbed them, taking small items to support her family. To her, these women weren't people. They were symbols of the mother who had betrayed her. On January 25, 2006, Barraza strangled 82-year-old Ana Maria de los Reyes Alfaro with a stethoscope in her home in the Venustiano Carranza borough. But this time, someone saw her leaving. Police arrived within minutes. Barraza was arrested fleeing the scene, carrying pension forms, a stethoscope, and a card identifying her as a social worker. Mexico was shocked. For years, authorities had dismissed reports of a serial killer as media sensationalism. When they finally acknowledged the pattern, they profiled the killer as male, even launching raids on transgender sex workers. The idea that the killer could be a 48-year-old female wrestler had never seriously been considered. Witnesses had described a masculine-looking woman, but no one connected the dots until it was too late. Fingerprint evidence linked Barraza to at least 10 of the 40 murders attributed to La Mataviejitas. Witnesses from previous crime scenes identified her. She resembled composite sketches that had been circulated for months. When questioned, she confessed to murdering Alfaro and 3 other women, claiming she killed Alfaro after a dispute over payment for cleaning services. She denied involvement in the other murders, but the evidence was overwhelming. The prosecutor alleged she was responsible for as many as 40 deaths. Barraza admitted her motive was resentment toward her mother, the woman who had sold her for alcohol. Every elderly woman she killed was a surrogate for the mother she could never forgive. In the spring of 2008, Juana Barraza stood trial. On March 31st, she was found guilty on 16 charges of murder and aggravated burglary. She was sentenced to 759 years in prison. Under Mexican law, the maximum sentence is 60 years, meaning she will likely serve the full 60 years behind bars. While incarcerated at Santa Marta Acatitla prison, Barraza has worked as a gym instructor and sold tacos to support her family. She reportedly married and divorced while serving her sentence. As of 2025, she remains imprisoned and will likely die behind bars. Juana Barraza killed at least 16 women, possibly dozens more. She blamed her mother for every act of violence, every life she took. But at what point does trauma become an excuse rather than an explanation? She posed as a helper, a government worker offering aid. Her victims trusted her. They opened their doors, and she made them pay for sins that were never theirs. The little old lady killer is silent now, locked away. But the question remains, how many others did she kill before someone finally stopped her? 10 women, hundreds of victims, decades of terror hidden behind smiles, uniforms, and promises of care. These weren't accidents. They weren't crimes of passion. They were calculated, cold-blooded, and methodical. Evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it looks like a nurse, a caregiver, a neighbor, and that's what makes these stories so terrifying. If this video left you shaken, shocked, or questioning everything you thought you knew about human nature, you're not alone. Before you go, make sure you've liked this video and subscribed to the channel. We dive deep into the darkest corners of true crime, uncovering stories that will haunt you long after you press play. Turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Comment below which case shocked you the most, or if there's a story you want us to cover next. And remember, the world isn't always as safe as it seems. Stay vigilant, stay informed, and we'll see you in the next one. 10 women, hundreds of victims, decades of terror hidden behind smiles, uniforms, and promises of care. These weren't accidents. They weren't crimes of passion. They were calculated, cold-blooded, and methodical. Evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it looks like a nurse, a caregiver, a neighbor, and that's what makes these stories so terrifying. If this video left you shaken, shocked, or questioning everything you thought you knew about human nature, you're not alone. Before you go, make sure you've liked this video and subscribed to the channel. We dive deep into the darkest corners of true crime, uncovering stories that will haunt you long after you press play. Turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Comment below which case shocked you the most, or if there's a story you want us to cover next. And remember, the world isn't always as safe as it seems. Stay vigilant, stay informed, and we'll see you in the next one.